again, this is a journey. We are all constantly working on our own self-love and our self-love journey, like you were saying. And so to tell someone that they have to reach a certain point before anyone can love them is so unfair, because you are, every single person listening, every single person out there, you are fully capable of being loved right now. Right now. Are there things you may want to improve about yourselves? Are there things you may want to change and you hope continue to evolve? Of course. But that in no way means that you are now out of the love lottery.
Hello, and welcome back to Seek the Joy podcast. Happy Seek the Joy Tuesday. I'm your host, Sydney Weiss, and on the podcast today is Laura Behnke. She's a writer, speaker, coach, creator of the Life Actually company, and host of the Life Actually podcast. And this episode is so good. I cannot wait to dive into this one. There's so much you're going to take from my conversation with Laura. She's a 16-year TV sports anchor and reporter veteran, and she actually left the business in 2017 to pursue her passion for supporting and empowering women in all phases of their lives. Her work really helps women to put aside the idea of what you should be doing and instead embrace your own unique path. As Laura shares, there's the way you thought your life was going to go, and then there's your life actually. And so it's this actually piece that holds all of the possibilities once you choose to accept it. So in today's episode, we really dive into how to stop worrying about where you should be in life and instead drop those expectations and start owning your unique timeline and your unique path by embracing the life that you have right now. We talk about why there isn't just one way to live a happy and successful life, the importance of peer mentoring, and really surrounding yourself with modern day examples of love and relationship timelines. Laura debunks the myth of if you don't love yourself, no one else can love you. And I freaking love this part of the conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. And we also talk about why you're lovable right now, in this moment. Plus, Laura shares her journey navigating expectations and perfectionism, joy in this season of her life, her biggest dream, and so much more. Now more than ever, I just think it's so important that we have reliable resources that we can turn to. And that's where today's sponsor, BetterHelp, comes in. So I would love to share with you a little bit more about BetterHelp. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. And it's easy and free to change counselors if you don't think the person you've matched with is a good fit. And no matter where you're listening to Seek the Joy podcast right now, you can also use BetterHelp because the service is available for people worldwide too. I just think it's so valuable to talk to someone about what it is that you're going through, whether that's anxiety, depression, grief, loss, changes at work, or friendship dynamics or relationships, or you want to talk about the challenges of the last couple of years. And BetterHelp offers a broad range of expertise in their counselor network. So you'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions too, which I still think is a game changer. I really want you to live a happier, more joyful, and just ease-filled life. That's why I share these conversations with you. And so I'm just excited to share that as a listener of Seek the Joy podcast, you will get 10% off your first month by going to betterhelp.com/seekthejoy. Join over 1 million people and counting, taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/seekthejoy. The link will also be included in our show notes. I can't tell you how many times over the years, over the last month, I've had to remind myself that I'm on my own unique timeline and this life, this journey is my own. And of course, it's not going to look like anyone else's because it's not supposed to. And it's hard. It's hard not to compare ourselves to others, to friends, to family, to our parents, to siblings, etc. But I have just found that the less time we spend comparing our timeline and the more time we spend celebrating and honoring who we are and the life and the journey, that we're on in this moment, the better, because we can celebrate our accomplishments and celebrate who we are and what we've overcome and really start to step into the life that we are choosing and creating for ourselves. And that's why I know you're going to love this episode, because every single thing Laura says and talks about in our conversation just resonated with me so deeply. So Laura, thank you so much for this conversation and for coming on the podcast. As always, I can't wait to hear what you think about this one. So make sure to join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere, whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. And I think that's it. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Laura Behnke. Laura, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming on Seek the Joy. It's so funny, when I was diving into you and your work, I just kept having the same thought run through my mind about expectations and how in life we have our own expectations, and then we have expectations that society, our parents, our friends, etc., put on us. And I think a good place maybe to start in this conversation is talking about the expectations that you had for yourself and where your journey started. I know you've had this beautiful long road with your career, and it's taking you to this spot, which is probably different than what you expected. So could we start by just talking about your journey, and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, of course. And expectations are so crazy because we hold ourselves so strongly to them, and we tell ourselves it's normal. And yet, like you just said, we get all of these messages from so many different areas of our lives, society, family, friends, culture. So all of us are actually chasing expectations that we think are normal, that are different than everybody else. Like there's no such thing as normal. And yet it's so easy to say, but I'm not doing what I should be doing. It's like, well, but according to whom?
Yeah.
Which is definitely something that I battled. And, to some degree, we still battle for sure. This is a constant messages that are bombarding us, no matter how comfortable we get with our own unique path. But yeah, my story, I started out in TV. I was a sports anchor and reporter for 16 years and thought that, that was my dream job. That was everything that I wanted to do. And, when I was in it, I loved it. It was hard work. It was incredibly demanding. I had very little life. You are working a lot.
I can imagine.
Yeah. But what I started to realize is I think this is as you get older and you start to, your priorities start to shift and you start to see things a little bit differently. I was realizing just how much I was putting into this TV Laura persona, this idea that everything had to be perfect. Not only did my reporting and my anchoring have to be perfect, I mean, I could not make a mistake, or I was terrified that I would lose all credibility, even though we're human and we all make mistakes and sometimes say the wrong name. It doesn't mean we don't know what we're doing. But those are the things I told myself, but all the way down to how I looked, how I sounded, how I acted, but also who I was. I had this idea of what I wanted the audience to know about me or to think about me. And I had to be perfect. I had to be. And what does perfect even mean? I mean, I don't think I even knew what that meant. I did not want anything to, any sort of weakness or really any sort of just actual personality traits really to be able to come through. And my biggest thing during that whole time was that I was single, and I wasn't just single. I had never been in a relationship. So I was in my mid-30s. At this point, I'm in New York City. I'm working for one of the local stations there, living out a dream of mine, which was to make it to New York and to live in New York. And I was happy. My job was going well. My career was going well, but I was single and, early 30s, mid 30s, still being single, never having had a relationship. It became something I was so self-conscious of because we are so judged in society by our relationship status. And I had this idea that, well, if not only am I not married and I'm single, but I've never had a relationship, what are people going to think about me? And so it was my biggest fear was that somehow viewers or even my coworkers would find out that I had never been in a relationship. And so
I'm sure you felt like it was plastered across your forehead at times, for sure.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. And dating in New York City is hard enough. Dating in New York City when you're already on TV. And so people, I mean, I would get weird enough emails.
Recognizable. Yeah.
It was. Yeah. Yeah. And I was by no means famous in New York City. I remember the, the guy who hired me at my station in New York City was like, don't come here thinking you're going to be famous. Madonna lives here. Okay. She's famous. You're not famous. I was like, okay, got it. But people still knew who you were, you know, and it was exhausting. It was exhausting trying to keep up this idea of who I wanted people to think I was. And, you know, as I eventually met my now husband when I was 35 and a half, I always add the half because, you know, as you get older, every month feels like
every month counts. Yep.
You feel it. So at 35 and a half, I met my now husband, first relationship I ever had. And, I started to feel more comfortable talking about where I had been and what I had experienced with close, you know, with friends privately.
Yeah.
And I started to realize how many other women could connect with what I'd been through. They didn't have to have the exact same experience, but this idea of, oh, I've been holding myself to this standard, or I've been expecting that it should go like this. And to really get honest about our journeys and our fears and what has not gone according to plan, and how that's not a bad thing. And there was this like magical power that seemed to come with being able to connect with women on a level like that. And I started to realize that, you know what, no offense to all of the sports fans out there at all. I loved talking sports with you for 16 years, but I got to the point where I was like, I'm tired of talking about sports with men. Like I'm just, it doesn't light me up anymore. I want to connect with women and I want to talk about things that really matter to me. And so I left TV after 16 years, which was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I was 38 years old. So like I had been working my butt off to get to that point. And then you're like, oh, it's okay. I'm going to go start over.
And that's a big, like, totally oh my God moment too. Talk about moving away from an expectation of how you thought things were going to go.
Exactly. Yeah. In my mind, my career was TV all the way. I was going to make it to a network one day. I was going to be, whether it was a sideline reporter or a national anchor, like that was the goal. And then it was over. Yeah. And I wanted it to be over. Like I was ready. There was like this huge weight that lifted off my shoulders when I left TV. But at the same time, I didn't really know who I was. If I wasn't Laura on TV, who the heck am I? So it took a few years. It took a few years of kind of wading through all of that and trying to really decide what it was that I wanted to do. And in 2019, when I was 39, I launched the Life Actually company. And even then, life throws crazy things at you. So, you know, we launched my company and then had some family situations come up. My father-in-law had been very, very sick and he ended up passing away just a few days after we launched my company. My dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so like, I say all of this because even though I finally launched the company, it was still probably 6 months later before it actually became something, because I had to, I put it all aside in order to, you know, be with my family. Yeah. Because these things happen. So yeah, here we are now, 2021. Well, you know, then a pandemic happens in 2020.
Oh yeah, that thing.
Just a little detail.
Snuck on in. You have such a beautiful and really interesting story. And thank you for sharing all of that. And something I kept thinking about as you were talking is, I think we're often trying to balance a few things as women, or just as people, humans in general, of the expectations we have for ourselves, the expectations others have on us, the things that we really want, which could actually be separate and apart from those expectations, but still be very parallel and line up. And then also this lingering feeling that we are behind. Yes. And we're trying to balance all of those balls in the air at the same time, trying to advance relationships and your career and friendships and your own self-care and taking care of yourself and your family. And you brought up the situations that you've experienced. And I think this is something that's really hard to sort of differentiate for yourself, is the expectations that others have or the expectations that you have while at the same time thinking about the things that you want. And if you don't have the things that you want that are also the things that you expect, it can really do a number. Like I literally have my hands on my head. It can do a number on your self-esteem, on how you view yourself, your self-confidence. And I'm curious, what do you share with women when they share that with you of like, hey, I expected to be in a relationship at 35 and it's something I really want. I want a family and kids, but I don't have it. And it's doing a number on how I feel about myself. I mean, what are some things that you share in your work and through all the beautiful content that you put out there? Because I think that's something a lot of us deal with is like, I want this thing and I also expect it and it's not here. And by the way, that can apply to career too, and family and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Oh, there are so many things. One of my least favorite words in the English language is should.
Oh, it's the worst.
Keep telling ourselves, I should be this, I should be doing that, I should have done this by now. And it's such like, according to whom, that's the hard part, because it's these standards that we are setting for ourselves, but that's based on what's happening around us. And the biggest thing that I like to say to women right off the bat when we're talking about this is, it is totally normal to feel this way. It is so normal. Everyone feels this way to some extent about something in their lives. And also, it's hard. It is really, really hard to want something so badly, or to have this idea of how your life should be, or where you should be, or what you should be doing, and to have that not be the reality. That's hard. That is hard work. And it's a lifelong process that we go through of really accepting our own journey. And so, there's no like boot camp that I can put you through, and then tomorrow morning you're going to wake up and be like, oh, all of those worries I had before, they're gone. I am so happy with who I am in my life, and it is perfect. Yeah. That's not going to happen, and we tell ourselves though, that we should get to that point. We tell ourselves we're supposed to get to a point where like, we're always happy. It just doesn't work that way. And then we beat ourselves up when we're not happy. And then we get back into but I don't have this, and I'm not this person, and I should be that. And it can be such a cycle. And so I think the biggest thing is to acknowledge that we're going through this, acknowledge that, okay, I do have these ideas of what I think I should be doing, of where I thought I should be, of what should be next for me. I have these ideas, and it's okay. It's okay that I'm struggling with this. It's okay that I don't love right now everything about my story and everything about where I am. That is okay. And we're all doing the best that we can. We're really all doing the best that we can. And so, the important thing for me when I work with women on things like this is to just take some deep breaths. Try to put some of what it is that we're really dealing with into perspective. What is it about this should that hasn't happened? That what is it about that's really affecting me? What is the fear that's coming from that not having happened? And then we can start to kind of tackle what that means and what it actually looks like in reality. Because we can build these things up. Oh my God, I used to tell myself all the time, I am going to be alone forever. I'm never going to meet anybody. I'm going to be alone forever. And that's heavy. I mean, that is heavy. A huge statement.
Yeah.
When what I was really worried about was, I'm never going to meet my partner. I'm never going to get married. Does that mean that I'm alone? No, not necessarily. There are other things, there are other ways to focus on it, but to really get specific on what the things are that are scaring us, that we're telling ourselves, the story that we're telling ourselves in our head, to be able to start to take away maybe some of its power when we can boil it down a little bit, instead of just being this big, overwhelming, I am failing at life feeling, which we have all had to some extent.
Oh yeah.
It is totally normal.
Oh yeah. I love what you said, that we've got to stop looking at where we feel like we should be. And I really think it's about honoring your timeline, knowing that it's okay. But I so appreciate what you said about saying like, this sucks right now, and just acknowledging it and being okay with it. Because too often, when someone says, how are you? And you go, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. And if it's someone that's really close to you, they're going to go, no, really, like what's going on? Like we don't have to make everything beautiful and nice. We can acknowledge that it's hard and challenging and hurtful and disappointing. And I think the minute that we do that, we take some of the air out of this big balloon that's created with these stories that we tell ourselves. So saying, I'm going to be alone forever. That's like you said, it's heavy. It's a big story. And you start to create intricacies of what that's going to look like and how that's going to feel. But the minute that we start voicing that with someone that we trust and care about, and even if it's just voicing those concerns to yourself, it takes some air out of that very heavy balloon. And I love what you said. It's about diving in and figuring out, hey, what's the real fear here? Like at the end of the day, like, what is it? And for you, it was about, oh, I'm not going to find my partner. I'm not going to be married. I'm assuming not going to have the family that you wanted. Just such beautiful advice about naming it, really looking at it so that you can take some of the pressure off. Yeah. Because I've noticed for myself in my life in general, the moment I take the pressure off, I take some of the stakes out of the game. Yeah. Oh my God, I can relax a little bit and actually feel like I can figure something out as opposed to feeling like it's so huge.
Yeah, so true. And there is this, this toxic positivity that we are living in right now with social media, especially. I mean, social media is already a highlight reel. We are already being bombarded with everybody's best day ever.
It's the best of moment all the time. All the time.
And I mean, I have to take time away from social media too, even though this is what I talk to women about all the time. I still have moments where I'm like, oh gosh, my life does not look like that. What is and then I'm like, okay, all right, it's time for a break. Yeah. Stop scrolling, get off. But this idea too, that like, we always have to be okay. Just think positive. Just be positive.
I hate it.
And then good things will come to you. And, it goes into, I am not the biggest manifestation fan. I know it works for some people. I know that it is like just the Bible to so many people. Awesome. If it suits you, perfect. Great. Do it. That's the other thing. We all have to do what works for us. But this idea of, manifestation and just thinking positive and calling everything into your life, when it doesn't happen, you end up feeling like a failure. Like, okay, I did something wrong. And
to mess it up.
Yes, exactly. It's like, well, you just weren't trying hard enough. Okay, well, sometimes things just happen. But this idea that we have to live in this world of constant positive thinking. We don't want to live in a world of constant negative thinking. Obviously, that's not a good place to live. But we have to be able to allow ourselves to process the fact that we do have negative feelings sometimes, that we don't always feel great, that it's okay to have a bad day, and to know that in order to get back to positives and get back to the good stuff, we have to be able to acknowledge how we're actually feeling. And there has to be space for that.
Yeah. And a lot of the gems, like the wisdom, the things that we learn are in that space when you provide yourself the opportunity to process. Yes. When you're so focused on maintaining, I think, a level of positivity, which I'm all here for. This is Seek the Joy podcast, but I'm all about, I'm all about holding that space for joy and hardship and difficulty at the same time. And I think that's what's the most important, because if you are so hard on yourself and you're constantly trying to seek out the positive reframing of something, you're not allowing yourself the opportunity to sit in the more difficult emotions that we often classify as anger, disappointment, sadness, frustration. And there's a lot of gems and wisdom that come from allowing yourself to really sit in that space. So I really appreciate what you just said.
Well, and it's how we really appreciate the joy.
Exactly.
You if you're always telling yourself you're happy, then the times when you are really finding joy, do you even know that that's what brings you joy? Because you're constantly telling yourself,
we need the contrast. Yeah. We need the contrast in those moments. There's something that you mentioned earlier that really struck me, which is that society judges us so much and honestly so harshly by our relationship status. And it's this idea that if you're single, it says something about you. If you're a certain age and you've never been in a relationship, it says something about you. I can't tell you how many podcasts I've listened to where they say like, well, is it a red flag or a deal breaker if somebody is in their 30s and they've never been in a serious relationship? What does that say about them? Whether they're, no matter if they're male, female, how they classify their gender. And I think as a society, we really buy into that. Like if you've never been if you haven't hit that road mark, mark in the road, certain relationship status by a certain age, ooh, there's something wrong. Like this person's got something wrong with them. And I would love to talk a little bit about that, because I think that pressure really impacts the way we view ourselves. And this element, I think, of feeling confident, it impacts your mental health. And so I'm curious how, I don't know if this is the actual question I want to ask, but this is the first thing that's kind of coming to mind, is like, how can we sort of move past that, or help others in our lives sort of move past that? Because sorry, I'm having like a light bulb. It also goes back to what you were talking about earlier about how you wanted to be this perfect Laura, and share this very crafted image of yourself when you were a TV, sports reporter. And perfectionism, oh my God, that's a whole other lane to go down. But let's start with this one about, someone's relationship status. Like, how do we start to move past that, or feeling like it's just like something's inherently wrong?
Yeah, it's hard. Oh my gosh, everything you just said. We are a society that rewards being a couple. It doesn't matter if you are in a happy relationship. It doesn't matter if it's a healthy relationship. It doesn't matter if you are on your third marriage. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but that we place higher than a person who is single, especially a person who has always been single, and you get to a certain age. And it is so unfair. And it is a huge hill that we have to climb to get to a point where we can move past that. And unfortunately, there is very little that we can do to change ourselves. Like what little steps can we do every day? There are very few to change society right now, like as a whole. These
God, don't you just wish there was like a toolbox and we could all like reach in and grab a tool? I mean, that would be the best, but you're right. We can't.
We cannot. And so, I mean, this is a societal change that we need to happen, which is going to take time. So in the meantime, it has to come down to how we treat ourselves and how we view ourselves. And, to be a happy and content and successful and thriving single person, just the act of doing that, and of just living our lives and not being in a puddle constantly. And whenever anybody asks us if they were in a relationship, trying to feel like we have to explain why we're not, that is a little act of defiance of finding reasons to love the life that you have. And so these are little acts that hopefully will slowly begin to change the narrative, so that the questions that the inappropriate questions and
oh my God, so many
can start to go away. And again, this takes time, but I guess the more important thing is, we cannot change everybody. We can't even change the people necessarily who are closest to us, who might be the ones asking these really annoying questions. But we can find ways to be happy with the life that we currently have. And for all of the single women out there who are listening to this, I also want to make it clear too, there is no black and white between, I either get to be a happy, thriving single person, or I want to be in a relationship. Like, the two are not mutually exclusive. You can be very happy and thriving as a single person, and yet what you really hope happens one day and you want to happen one day is to be in a relationship. That's awesome. Absolutely awesome. And I truly believe that if that is what is in your heart and what you are looking for, that it is going to happen. You will find that person. I just can't tell you when. I just can't tell you how, and I can't tell you what it's going to look like. So in the meantime, how do we allow ourselves some joy? How do we allow ourselves to begin to embrace the life that we're living, instead of constantly thinking about all that we don't have, because it's stuff we want so badly. And again, when we want it so badly, it makes it all that much harder when it's not there. But yeah, I think it has to start with ourselves, and how we make our life more joyful, and how we can be happier in the little things in each day. And, whether that is finding voices on the internet. Shani Silver is incredible. Every single woman should be following her. But voices that are talking about being single in ways that aren't just here's how to find a partner. And just talking about living our lives and letting things happen. And finding voices like that are so important, because we don't always have that type of support in our actual life. Our friends don't always understand. Our family doesn't always understand. But knowing that there are resources and there are people out there who are talking your language, and being able to put ourselves into that community, and then hear these voices and start to realize I'm not only just okay, I'm better than okay. Like I have so much to be happy about. And that can be easier said than done. But when we do find ways to surround ourselves with those types of messages, it helps so much.
It helps so much. And I think this is really about looking at what you have versus what you don't. We tell ourselves a huge story about the things that we don't have, but we're not focusing enough on the things that we do have.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit of a reframing or perspective shift that's so important, especially with what you were just sharing about continuing to live your life and find ways to celebrate yourself and enjoy your life in the moment, in the season that you're in now, if you are single or even if you are in a relationship, because it is about how do I continue to live my life and enjoy my life and the people in it and the things that I do, despite still recognizing that I may not have all of the things that I want right now, or all the things that I might expect for myself right now. So it sounds like a lot too about, hey, how can we play up this story too about the things that we do have and look at those things and appreciate it? Because it is so easy to get wrapped up in the story about the negative, about what I don't have, about what I'm expecting, what society thinks of me because I don't have those things. So you're right. It is an act of defiance. It is a bit of an act of rebellion to,
oh my gosh, I just lost you.
Oh,
can you hear me?
I can hear you. No, it's okay. Can you hear me?
I just lost you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Okay, I hear you now. Oh my gosh, I do not know what just happened.
It's okay. You probably unplugged me. It's okay. I was just saying, I think it really is an act of defiance and an act of rebellion to sort of live your best life, right? To just continue to live and enjoy your time and take a little bit of the pressure off. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so important. And I do also want to recognize that that's hard. That can be very difficult to reframe our perspectives and to really think about our life as a whole instead of that one thing that we're telling ourselves. And it's also hard. Like I'm sure a lot of women can relate to this. Growing up for me, I saw my parents who were happily married and met when they were like 20.
Oh my gosh.
That was their life. All of my friends' parents, whether they were still together or divorced, they still had like gotten married and had kids. Like all the adults that I grew up seeing were living this one story. And so I went off and started my own story, but at some point started to panic because it didn't look anything like anyone's that I had ever seen.
The examples that you grew up with. I mean, I think, my parents are in that generation too. My parents met when they were 29, maybe, and 31. And so me at almost 31, sometimes they don't do this on purpose. And my mom doesn't do this as much as my dad. Sorry, Dad, if you're listening. But I think sometimes my parents or our parents or that generation are like, what do you mean it's so hard? Like I went to a charity event and I met your mother. You know what I mean? So there was a time where my dad would say to me, well, why don't you go find a charity event to go to? There's a bit of a disconnect between the examples that we saw growing up, even on television versus what the reality, I think, of life kind of looks like right now.
Yeah.
For so many. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and that's why I appreciate conversations like this so much. That's why I started my podcast that I did, because I just want opportunities for women to share their stories and to share what they're actually going through,
Yeah.
because we haven't necessarily been able to grow up seeing all of these options. And
Mm-hmm.
so in some ways, a very dear friend of mine said this to me when I was first talking about the company and launching the company and what I wanted. And she's like, we have to peer mentor each other right now.
Mm,
We don't necessarily have those perspectives and those ideas of all what a different type of life could look like. So we have to share. So
yeah.
it's so important that we do talk about these things, and we do talk about the things that, we actually, the ways we have struggled, the
Mm-hmm.
different paths that we have taken, the what we may have expected and how it instead ended up going,
Yeah.
and being honest and open about our actual experiences. And then just somehow there is this power in just hearing somebody's unique story that can help you start to feel a bit more comfortable and
Mm-hmm.
accepting of your own.
Mm-hmm. And knowing, by the way, that those options are okay.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to fit a quote unquote mold that we've seen. And I think the more that we can be open and share with one another, the more we can normalize that your timeline is your own, your
Yes.
story is your own, it's going to be unique, and you can desire the things that you want for yourself and for your life and still develop and nourish who you are in this moment and who you are in this season. And I think sometimes we feel like, this is so interesting because I just had this thought going kind of back to toxic positivity. There is an element of toxic self-love that I think is out there too,
Mm,
where it's this idea that if you don't love yourself, no one else can
yes.
love
No.
you.
Oh,
And I literally think about this at least once a week
yeah.
because my self-love journey is forever evolving. There are days
Mhm.
where I am like, Sydney, you're killing it. You're a badass. I love you. You're doing amazing. I'll wake up the next morning and I'll go, oh my God, like what is wrong with you? You just said that stupid thing in that meeting. Like, you know what I mean? We
Yep.
are go on highs and lows. That's not going to preclude someone else from loving me. That's not going to preclude my friends from valuing me and our friendship. And I think, God, can we just talk a little bit about this? Because there's this narrative out there, like if you don't love yourself, no one else is going to love you. And I'm just like, what do you mean? I
Oh,
don't know if it really works like that.
no, I am so glad you brought that up, because that is one of the things I hate
So we're
hearing.
on the same page. I
Oh my
love it.
God.
Great.
So much on the same page. I've talked about this a lot. I will constantly continue to talk about it, because not only do I completely not believe it,
Mm-hmm.
but it is so damaging, and it is
Yeah.
such a dangerous message. It tells you you have to, in some senses, become perfect in
Mm.
how you understand yourself and all of that. But that's a version of perfection. You have to love yourself completely before anyone can love you. Not fair. And I always ask, when people say something like this, I'm like, okay, look around at all of the people you know who are in relationships. Now weed out the ones who are in bad relationships. Look at the ones who are in good
Mm-hmm.
relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Do they know themselves perfectly? Are they at some higher level of like Zen and self-understanding than
Mm-hmm.
you? Do they float off their pillows when they meditate because they have such a strong connection with themselves? Hell no, they
No
don't.
way. No, no.
And nobody gets to a point like that again, this is a journey. We are all constantly working on our own self-love and our self-love journey, like you were saying. And so to tell someone that they have to reach a certain point before anyone can love them is so unfair, because
Mm-hmm.
you are, every single person listening, every single person out there, you are fully capable of being loved right now. Right now. Are there
Mm-hmm.
things you may want to improve about yourselves? Are there things you may want to change and you hope continue to evolve? Of course. But that in no way means that you are now out of the love lottery. Like you are not
You're not out of
worthy.
the running. You're not out of
No,
the running for no, absolutely not.
no. And
No.
again, it continues to perpetuate this idea that as a single person, you are screwing it up.
Mm.
You are doing something wrong that has put you here. And so you need to be fixed.
Yeah.
You do not need to be fixed
You're lovable right now,
right now.
who you are, as you are on the journey that you're on. Yeah, I think there's this constant strive. We're constantly striving for this element of perfection. And perfection is super dangerous because it keeps you from experiencing this life.
Yeah.
You think I have to wait until I have this thing to do the next thing. I have to lose X amount of weight to put myself out there in that way. It's striving for this element of perfection that actually keeps you hidden
Yeah.
rather than allowing you to be out there and experience your life in the way that feels good for you. And I think so many of us experience that. And I think there's an interesting connection too between the expectations we feel and see and experience from society with striving for perfection. And that's what I was kind of intimating at earlier. And I was like, that's a whole other lane to go down, because I think this is such an interesting point, and maybe not something that we often think about or talk about, is that you feel a certain pressure, you're working to get yourself to that marker, it ends up you trying to be perfect, you recognize I'm not, oh shoot, now I can't go do that thing. And it becomes this wheel, this sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy, this circle that you get stuck on. And the next thing you know, you're not loving your life, you're not enjoying your time, you're striving for something that doesn't even exist. And then you're stuck feeling like, well, I'm not even lovable because of all the expectations and things I'm hearing. I mean, talk about like throwing yourself on some kind of loop that is just going to drive you nuts.
I know. The incredible Brene Brown talks about perfectionism a lot, and how so many of us, and myself included, I remember hearing her talk about perfectionism a few years back, really for the first time, and something clicked in me. I was like, oh my God, yeah, I've been doing this. We use this idea of, oh, I'm a perfectionist, as kind of like a humble brag, like, oh my God, yeah. Oh, I know it's bad, but I'm a perfectionist. So everything, that means just I'm really detail oriented, and like, it's actually a total compliment. It's not. Perfectionism keeps us from growth. It keeps us from developing. It keeps us from moving forward when you have this idea of the way it has to be. And then when you say, we're always looking for that next thing. Oh, I have to have this before this can happen. And then I have to do this. And then each time we get to that point, there's always something next.
There's always more. There's always more to feel like you're striving for, or you've got to fit into. Absolutely. Always.
And just because we do get to that next milestone or that next level, we tell ourselves before we get there, well, that's all I need. That's all I need. Once I find my person, once I'm no longer single, well, that's when everything's going to click. That is when my life is going to.
Oh my God. How many times do we tell ourselves that? How many times have I told myself that? All the time. Oh my God. Yes. Everyone listening is probably being like, yes, me too, Laura. Same.
All the time. And so I got, when I met my husband, we got married. 2 weeks after we got married, my father-in-law was diagnosed with cancer. 4 weeks after that, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. The first 2 years of our marriage, while so happy that we were married and we were together, we were going through this together, the first 2 years of our marriage was centered around losing our dads and everything that went through that. In so many ways, the hardest, and also for me, I'd left TV at this time too, so I was trying to figure out who I was. In so many ways, the hardest time of my life has been since I met my husband. And then we decided, we were on this journey of trying to start our own family, which led us to IVF, which led us to multiple failed rounds, which led us to thinking, okay, this might never happen, which now led to I'm about to give birth. It could happen anytime now. Hopefully it won't during this podcast, but like that was not easy.
No,
we've been married 3.5 years now. And I can honestly say this has been the hardest 3.5 years of my life. So just because I met him did not make life perfect. No, it did not fix everything that was going on, because there's nothing that can do that. I'm so happy I have him. Don't get me wrong. And I'm so grateful to be going on this difficult journey with him. But all those things I told myself, I would have my life completely figured out once I just met my person. Total BS.
No. And it's so interesting you shared that the most challenging, difficult, testing time in your life has been since you got married, which I think is so interesting, because we think, yep, snap of the finger, everything's going to suddenly miraculously fall into this beautiful, puzzle piece. Everything's going to be beautiful. But the truth is life ebbs and flows. It's rocky. You can't predict anything.
Nope.
Nothing is ever going to be what you expected. But I know you talk about this in your work. Like, it's within that actual thing, life actually, it's within those moments where that's where the good stuff is, where you're actually in it and you're experiencing your life. And that's where you really get to learn about yourself, whether you have a partner or not. It's so in those ebb and flows and highs and lows, and the most difficult, challenging, grief-stricken time in your life where you actually learn the most about who you are.
Well, that's life. That's
life.
There's these ideas of how we thought it should go. And then there's your life actually. And, you just mentioned, that's what I always say. It's the actually that makes up our lives. That's the actually that makes up our stories. It's the actually that's where all the good stuff is, and the hard stuff.
Yeah.
But the good stuff comes in so many ways that we never expected, but we fight it because we think it's supposed to be one other way.
I wonder what would happen if we just stopped fighting it and just allowed ourselves to ease into what is actually happening in these moments, and being able, you don't even have to celebrate it, but just allowing yourself to be present with it.
Yeah.
If we just stopped fighting against what is so much more could actually unfold in ways that we just would never be able to predict. But I think we're constantly chasing like these arbitrary milestones, these things that are quote unquote, we think are supposed to be there or should be there, rather than celebrating the moment that we're in right now, highs and lows and all of it.
So true. And think of all the joy we could find if
all
we just relaxed into it and let it happen.
As we're sort of wrapping up this conversation, you just brought up joy. And I'm so curious that by the time this airs, you will no longer be pregnant because it's going to be like in 2 months, and there's no way that's still going to be the case. But I'm curious, as you bring this little one into the world, what are you most excited about? What does joy look like for you in this season of your life? I think such a beautiful thing to think about. So if you're open, would love for you to share just about joy in this moment and in this season for you.
Yeah, it's something I never necessarily thought was going to happen. From before I met my husband and being single and not knowing if I was ever going to have the family that I expected I would have, to then going through our challenges and having it take so much time and so much longer than I ever expected, that I am going to be a mom for the first time at the age of 42 is definitely not the way I drew it up. But I realized something a few months back. I was reading, I read a headline. I didn't actually read the whole article, I admit, but I felt like I got enough from the headline. It was a woman who was writing like kind of like a personal essay for one of these outlets. And the headline was something like, I had kids in my 20s when I was supposed to. Now I'm in my 40s and I don't know what to do. And I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. If you had your kids in your 20s, like I thought I was supposed to do, they're going off to college in your 40s. So here I am. I just turned 42, thinking about, I have friends whose kids are about to go off to college who are my age.
Wow.
And oh my gosh, if you got married and had, and again, there's nothing wrong with this. This is everybody's journey is different, but this struck me so much because for those of us who don't have that journey, like people with that journey get validated all the time. So I like to be able to help validate the people who are on a very different journey.
Yeah.
So when I look at it as you get married so early, you have kids so early, and that's the only life as an adult that you really know. And then they leave. Like, no wonder people have midlife crises. I get it. It makes sense. And I think then instead about my life and all the things I was able to do and the ways I was able to explore what I wanted and who I was, and then get to this point where now I am 42 and I'm about to start a completely new chapter in my life. There is no time for a midlife crisis. This is so exciting to be able to start this next chapter. And, I don't feel 42. I don't, whatever that even means. I don't feel like I am. I still think I'm 28 in my head, maybe 30. But I'm so excited
Mm-hmm.
to be able to begin this chapter and to begin it with all of the knowledge I have about myself and all of the
Mm-hmm.
tools that I have developed over the years and all the things that I've learned, and
Mm-hmm.
to be able to bring a little girl into this world and get to be her mom. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I appreciate this so much. And again, not that somebody who has children much earlier doesn't appreciate it by any means. We are all on our own journey. I know for me, this is just it's just the coolest.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
just the coolest thing that I get to do this, and I'm doing it with someone who is my, I don't like the word soulmate, but as you know, as close as we get to that, he
Mm-hmm.
is my person. And
Mm-hmm.
I could not have found him until I was 35 and a half. That's just the way it went. And I
Yeah.
cannot imagine being able to do this with anybody else. So there are
Mm.
so many things that I am grateful for in this crazy, completely unexpected timeline
Mm.
that I've put together for myself. So I think my joy there will be a lot of joy that comes from many things. There'll also be a lot of lack of joy, with lack of sleep and dirty
You're in for a
diapers.
whole
And
new ride. You're
it's
in for a whole new
for
ride.
the first time in my life,
Mhm.
I'm not going to get to sleep 8 hours a night. Like, what is this? But there is so much just joy
Yeah.
in the little things about being able to begin
Mm-hmm.
this adventure.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so beautiful. And I think, God, there's so much about what you just said that stood out to me. But something I want to highlight as we end this conversation is you would not have been able to meet your partner at 35, this particular partner, if you did not experience everything else you did
Yes.
leading up to that moment. And I think if we can leave the audience, the listener with that message, how beautiful. Everything you're doing is preparing you for the next moment, the next person you meet, the next adventure, the next experience, the next job. And these are life lessons that get to build on each other, that allow you to get to know who you are, to
Yes.
tap into a wealth of knowledge that only you can collect for yourself. So something I tell myself all the time is, oh, that experience, yeah, challenging. Oh, really beautiful. Oh, I don't know how I feel about it. It's okay. It's just a tool in my toolbox that I get to take with me. It's an understanding of self that I wouldn't have known if I didn't have that particular experience. So, how beautiful. You would not have been able to have this particular partner in your life and really feel. I mean, I just gather from you this sense of love and value and appreciation. And oh my God, the emotions run the gamut if you did not have the experiences you did leading up to that moment. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. Just
Oh,
so beautiful.
yeah.
And I think just such a powerful message.
Yeah. No, well, I had to just to add quickly to
Please.
that, I
Yes.
always would say to my husband, especially when we first met, why couldn't we have met 10 years earlier when we
Mm,
would have had so much time to just enjoy each other and travel? Like, now we have to start thinking about, we're in our late 30s. We have to think about kids and if that's going to happen, and retirement, and are we going to buy a house and all these things. I was like, oh, it would
yeah.
have just been so much easier. Also, I could have spared myself so many years of being single. And he didn't even, the first time I said it, he didn't even miss a beat. And he's continued to say it since then. He's like, Laura, when I was 28, I would not have known how to treat you in the way you deserve to be treated.
Mm,
And I was like, when I was 28, I would have had no idea that I should demand that.
mm,
We needed to go through the things that we went through to find each other in the moment that we did, for
mm,
it to turn into what we currently have.
absolutely. Okay. I want to ask you the question I ask everybody that comes on the podcast. And that is, it's a little bit of a loaded one, but we'll see. We'll see. It's not called. The question is, what is your biggest dream?
Oh my goodness. That has evolved so much. When I was
Mm-hmm.
younger, my biggest dream was, to be married and to have kids. That was part of it. But also, I think it was to be successful. And to me, to be successful meant have the career, have the notoriety, since I was in TV, become a household name, and make lots of money so that you can live in
Mm-hmm.
this incredible like life that you can only imagine right now. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, you know what? I want, my biggest dream at this point now is to be incredibly successful. But to me, the idea of what success means has changed. It means to be comfortable to live a life that I design, that I get to spend time with family, that I can feel fulfilled in what I do. I do not need to be rich. I do not need to be, the next CEO of my own huge company that everybody knows I don't need any of that. I just want to spend time with my family and the people that I care about, to have the means to be able to do that, to raise a happy, healthy little girl, and to be present for all of it. So that, and to be able to do what I want to do, which is work with women and help them through their own challenges and the things that they struggle with. But this idea that I used to have that people need to know my name, I need to be famous. I don't care. And money, I have to be making this much because that's how I gauge how successful I have been. I want to be present in my life, and I want to be able to spend time with the people that I care about. That to me is the ultimate success.
Beautiful. I love it. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast and for everything that you shared. And I think, God, this is a conversation that so many need to hear, myself included. So I'm so grateful for it. So Laura, where can everybody find you, your work, connect, your podcast, and learn more?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me, Sydney. This has been a great conversation. I've really, really enjoyed chatting with
Me too.
you. You can find me on Instagram. It's at Laura B. Behnke. The last name is Behnke. My website is laurabehnke.com. And my podcast is called The Life Actually Podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm not sure exactly when this is going to go live, but we are taking December and January off so I can do some maternity leave. Again, trying to be present in the moment and what's happening to me. So I'm putting a little hiatus on the podcast, but we'll be back in 2022.
Perfect. All right. Everything's going to go in the show notes. So you can go right under the podcast, wherever you're listening right now, or seekthejoypodcast.com/show-notes. Everything will be there. This has just been so wonderful. I can't thank you enough. And I'm just wishing you just health, happiness. I can't wait for your little girl to come here and for you to just dive into this new chapter in your life. And Laura, this has just been wonderful. So thank you again.
Thank you, Sydney.
Seek the Joy podcast is a production of Seek the Joy Media and created, produced, and hosted by me, Sydney Weiss. You can tune into all of our episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're enjoying the show, hit follow and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Make sure to join the community, join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere. And don't forget, you can actually watch today's new episode and all of our episodes on our brand new YouTube channel. Click that link in the show notes to subscribe and tune in. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you right back here next week for another Seek the Joy Tuesday.